All right, students, now we're going to look at the role of carbon in climate change. We looked last time in the previous module about carbon dioxide being in the atmosphere, being a type of greenhouse gas. And so now we're going to look at, what is carbon and what are some important biological, geological processes that carbon is involved in. Well, carbon, of course, is an atom. The structure of this carbon atom is shown here, and we can see that carbon has a nucleus, and inside this nucleus are protons and neutrons. Carbon has electrons orbiting it. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and they're not necessarily numbered in that order. If you look at this carbon atom, we can see that there are 2 orbits surrounding the carbon atom. There's this first orbital shell and the second one. This first orbital shell can only hold 1, 2 electrons. The second orbital shell can hold up to 8, so it can hold up to 8. But right now there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, which means that there is space for 4 more electrons to be held there. Now, this property of carbon is one of the reasons that carbon is so important in biology, is because it's very accepting to share electrons with other atoms. Well, it's this ability of carbon to form bonds, and so you can see here that this carbon is bonded to this one. This one has 2 lines, which means that this is a double bond. It means that it's sharing 2 electrons. These chains of carbon and hydrogen are called hydrocarbons, and the study of these hydrocarbons in living organisms is where we get organic chemistry from. These carbon chains can be linear, so these could be called linear, and these hydrocarbons can also form rings. Well, carbon is very abundant on the planet, and carbon gets cycled through these kind of geochemical processes, which means that living organisms absorb carbon, and carbon is sometimes stored in the earth as well. If you burn wood has plants take in a lot of carbon through photosynthesis, and if you burn these fossil fuels through combustion, you release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Organisms that live on the planet take in oxygen, and when they do respiration, they release carbon dioxide as a byproduct too. The ocean, things come into the ocean, they settle at the bottom, and you form sedimentation. Carbon gets trapped in sedimentation. Fish die, and they become part of the sedimentation too. But fish respirate too, which releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as well. When organisms decay, leaf litter decays, anything that dies decays, it releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere as well. And so those are the ways that we get carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And there are other ways that we can get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Photosynthesis is one way. The ocean will absorb carbon dioxide through diffusion, and it becomes bicarbonate in the ocean. We talked about that too, the acidification of the ocean. Plants, when they die, get buried, and they store carbon in their bones and their living material too. And so these are all ways that carbon gets added. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word. The carbon gets added to the earth. So the major reservoirs, which means that a large kind of hold of carbon, are the oceans, fossil fuels, and in the atmosphere. And these are what we call carbon sinks. This is where carbon goes and stays for a long time. Living organisms release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere through respiration and breakdown of organic materials, and this is called the carbon source. And so these are the things, producing carbon, and these are the things storing carbon. Well, photosynthesis is one of the major ways that carbon dioxide gets pulled out of the atmosphere. And plants do photosynthesis, bacteria do photosynthesis, and anything that's an autotroph, the word auto means self and troph means feeder, they can make their own food. And the reason they can make their own food is they can take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into some cell, like a cell organelle, like a chloroplast. And inside the chloroplast, we're going to look at photosynthesis. You have to have some energy source to power the chloroplast, but what the chloroplast will spit out is this carbon, but this carbon will now be a hydrocarbon, something like sugar. And that's the reason plants take in carbon dioxide, is so that they can take the carbon from the carbon dioxide and make sugars from it. Well, we talked about a chloroplast, and chloroplasts are found all over the plant, really, but the leaves themselves have a lot of chloroplasts in them. If you took this leaf here and looked at it, you would have this top layer of cells, a bottom layer of cells, but all in here, all of these little green things are chloroplasts. And these chloroplasts are found in these specialized cells called mesophyll cells. And these chloroplasts is the site of photosynthesis. Well, if you look at this chloroplast, you see these little stacks of discs. Those are called thylakoids. Those thylakoids are stacked into structures that we call grana. So this whole thing would be called a grana. And the space between the grana is called the stroma. So all of this kind of space in here is called the stroma. Well, it's in these parts of the cell that photosynthesis occurs. Well, the inputs and outputs of photosynthesis and respiration, which happens in the mitochondria, are connected by the carbon cycle. Because what the chloroplast will do is it will take in carbon dioxide. So I don't want to confuse the drawing here. Let's see. So what we have here is the chloroplast taking in carbon dioxide, and they put out chemical energy in the form of sugars. And those sugars, or this chemical energy, gets taken in by the mitochondria, and oxygen gets taken in, and they release ATP, which is chemical energy too. But the carbon dioxide, water, and oxygen gets traded back and forth between chloroplasts and mitochondria. Remember I said that plants take in carbon dioxide, and so they'll take carbon dioxide in, they'll put it into a chloroplast. So this is a chloroplast here. And what they do with these low energy carbons is they will build these sugar molecules out of them. Well, in order to get carbon to bond to other carbon, you have to have some type of energy input. It takes work to build anything. It takes work to stack bricks. Well, in chemistry, it takes work in order to get these carbons to bond together. And what plants do is they use light energy from the sun. Well, photosynthesis happens in kind of two stages. One we call the light reactions, and the purpose of the light reactions is to capture energy from the sun. So here we have solar energy coming in. Those reactions happen on these thylakoids, and what these light reactions do is they produce these really high energy chemicals called NADPH. These things are just carrying electrons. ATP, which is basically just like cell energy. And these two things here travel over to this, the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle is like this wheel that turns around and around and around. And when it turns around, if you put carbon dioxide if you put carbon dioxide into the cycle and you can spin the cycle, you can spit out a carbohydrate. And you can take these and build sugars from them. These are important molecules in photosynthesis: ATP, NADPH. Make sure you read that and understand what those are. Well, the first set of reactions are called light-dependent reactions because they require solar energy. And here's what happens. So inside this chlorophyll, and so inside these little thylakoids here, we have something called chlorophyll pigment. And a pigment is something that will absorb energy from the sun. So chlorophyll molecules absorb energy from the sun. We know that the sun is energetic. If you wear a dark shirt on a sunny day, then you can feel that heat. Well, inside of this chlorophyll molecule, the pigment, electrons get excited, right? And when electrons are energized, they become energized, and they become, and you can take that energy in the electron and move it from one place to another. As a matter of fact, the lights in your room work because electrons are flowing across a copper wire. Well, another thing that happens is this electron then gets passed along down these electron transport chain. This electron transport chain will produce ATP. Right? So the energy from this, so the energy from here is used to make ATP. Well, while that's happening, this chlorophyll molecule here is losing electrons. I mean, electrons are leaving and they don't come back. And so one of the things that has to happen is plants need a lot of water, and they take this water and they split it. So water is being split. And when you split water, you make oxygen and you produce electrons. These electrons are then donated up there to that chlorophyll molecule. Well, these electrons are being passed along, making ATP, and they end up here at this other thing called photosystem 1. This is photosystem 2. Photosystem 2 happens first. Photosystem 1 happens second. We name them PS2 and 1 because that's the order we discovered them in, not the order in which they happen. But once again, these electrons get energized and they get passed on to this molecule called NADP+, which is an electron carrier. And remember, I said if you can carry electrons from one place to another, you can carry the energy of that electron. And so NADPH gets created, which is an electron that's energized, and those things end up at the Calvin cycle. And the Calvin cycle is where we take carbon dioxide, we can put it into the cycle, and it's a biochemical cycle where we use ATP to rearrange the carbons, and we use NADPH we got from the light reactions to add energy to it. And what happens is we produce this molecule of G3P. We make 6 of these. 1 of them leaves. The other 5 continue on into the cycle so that they can accept more carbon dioxide. Well, carbon is often related to fossil fuels. So what are fossil fuels? Fossil fuels refer to a fuel source that's been formed within the earth from plant and animal remains. So some 300 million years ago, you had some kind of swamp, All of these things died, they fell to the ground, and so they become dead plants. Dirt gets deposited on top of it. Maybe there's water on top of it, kind of smushing it down. And over time, sediment builds up and it becomes rocks and dirt. And at the bottom, all of these dead plants, through time and heat and pressure, become some type of fossil fuel like coal. Here's the total CO2 emissions by the world, and this is through the burning of fossil fuels. We didn't really know about fossil fuels in 1750 or 1800, 1850, but what important event happened around 1900? Well, it was the Industrial Revolution. And the industry required some type of fuel source, and the Industrial Revolution required the burning of coal. And so what we see is CO2 emissions went from 0 tons to now the total is around 35 billion tons annually. That's 35 billion tons of carbon dioxide being deposited into the atmosphere. It doesn't all stay there. Some of it gets absorbed by plants, but there is extra. And the atmosphere, of course, is getting thicker with carbon dioxide. And that's it for this chapter. I hope you enjoyed it.